And so we as men who don't batter, don't abuse our partners, have to think, okay, am I willing to give up the benefits of sexism?
Abuse is an all-time epidemic, particularly male violence against women and children. But why do men abuse? Well, today, Chuck Derry, co-founder of the Gender Violence Institute, joins Lisa and I to talk about the consequences of male violence.
So one of the topics that I get asked all the time is, do abusive men know that they're doing this on purpose? They can't possibly know, right? Or what's the reason that they're doing this? It doesn't make sense. And I came across an article written by Chuck Derry, and this is what I'm so excited to talk about today. This article was so eye-opening, and I kind of want to ask, where did this come from? Tell me what led you to write this article. What experiences did you have that made you kind of gather this information and write the article?
Well, it was amazing. 1983, I started working facilitating batterers groups, accountability groups, and most of the men mandated by the courts to be there because we were working with the criminal and civil justice systems to hold men accountable. And at first we thought it was just an anger management problem, or they just lost control or other things, right? And then the Domestic Abuse Intervention Program in Duluth, Minnesota had a focus group with survivors of domestic violence, women, and they talked about what their experiences were, and they created the Power and Control Wheel, and that which has been out 120 different countries and 60 different languages. And it was one of the first time I thought, oh, so this might be conscious behavior. I mean, it looks like it is conscious behavior. The rubber on the wheel is sexual and domestic violence. The hub is power and control. And then all kinds of spokes, intimidation, emotional abuse. So anyway, one day in group, we have 24-week group, 1 day a week, hour and a half, 12 to 15 guys in group. So I thought, well, okay, guys. So I asked them, what are the benefits of your violence? And they all looked at each other, which is notable, right? And the guy said, there are no benefits. And I said, well, you must be getting something out of it. Otherwise, why would you do it? And then they looked at each other again, and then one guy started talking. And then I started writing up on a 4-foot by 8-foot blackboard everything they said about all the benefits. And then we ran out of space on a 4-foot by 8-foot blackboard, and we ran out of space. And the first time I saw that, I thought, oh my God. Here's what I thought in my head. Oh my God, why would you give it up? And then I thought, should I ask him? And I said, okay. So guys, why would you give it up? And then we filled a 2-foot by 2-foot space on the blackboard. Got arrested, orders for protection, multiple divorces. My adult children won't invite me to their weddings anymore, and I have to come to groups like this. That was one of the first times I fully understood how critical the criminal and civil justice system response to battering is to change men's behavior, because that was the prime thing. And I did this on several groups, and they always had the same answer. Got arrested, orders for protection, and I got to come to groups like this. And so if I ever had to choose between doing a batterers group or having a good, clear protocol for arrests for criminal justice system and prosecution and consequences, I'd always pick the criminal justice system and the civil justice system.
When you think about this and about the reasons the men were giving, what connected you to it? Did you resonate with some of the reasons? Or, you're a man living in the world. So help me understand what your experience was seeing that on the blackboard.
Well, it wasn't anything new. A lot of times people think, we just have to raise men's awareness. When I was 17, I was in a small town in northwestern Minnesota, a town of 2,500, 10 miles south of Canada. And it was women's livers then. It was 1973. And I thought to myself for the first time, what would it mean to me personally if men and women were really equal? And within 2 minutes, I had the answer. I'd have to give some stuff up. And I thought, nah, I don't think so. And I was a nice guy. And now I had more awareness about the benefits of sexism for men. And so for them to put on all these benefits, all their violence, this is the foundation of sexism, violence and oppression and privilege, right? When all else fails, he's big enough to do this and get what he wants when he wants it. And a lot of times guys will just say, all I have to do is give her my look and she'll do what I want. Once he's been violent with her, all he has to do is let her know that you do this or else you're going to get hurt. And so when I started doing this work, I was 27 years old, working at a feminist women's organization. And I thought I was a pretty nice guy. I didn't think I was very sexist or anything. And then I started doing this work, and then I found out my big toe was sexist. It wasn't just this little attitude. It was bone deep. I was raised with it. And so with this many men beating and raping this many women, it could not happen without widespread cultural support. And I was in this culture of male dominance, male supremacy, sexism. So I recognize it. However, when I first did this, all the benefits I got, 4 by 8-foot blackboard, and we ran out of space of all the benefits, it did blow me away. I was amazed, but it did not surprise me.
So what's interesting though is you're listing all these benefits that were reported to you from these men. Do you think that they actually see it as benefits or entitlements?
Both. But they get their entitlement by doing this, grabbing her by the throat, shoving her up against the wall, throwing her on the ground, kicking her in the stomach, bashing her head off the ground. And that's normal behavior. I'm not talking extreme violence here. I'm talking about this is happening all the time with men. So it's both the benefits and entitlements, because they create entitlements by threatening to harm this other person if she doesn't do what he says to do. And male entitlement keeps it silent. There's so many places globally that are not arresting men for beating their wives and girlfriends because men are the head of the household. It's man's world. He's in charge. What was she doing? Right? You always see immediately when women want to talk about this, the first thing that happens is, well, what were you doing? And that's great for men. And not just men who batter, but all men. And so we as men who don't batter, don't abuse our partners, have to think, okay, am I willing to give up the benefits of sexism? Am I willing to challenge the cultural norms that support this violence, the sexual and domestic violence? In the U.S., 1 in 3 women are beaten by the man she's in a relationship. And the Center for Disease Control just came out with a study last year that said 1 in 2 women are sexually assaulted. This could not be happening without widespread cultural support. And so when I do trainings, I'll do trainings for men sexual assault center every couple of months in St. Cloud, Minnesota, for men who are busted for prostituting women. And it's not an us-them thing. It's an us thing. I'm not the good guy and they're the bad guys. It's an us thing. And I tell stories about my cultural norms I grew up with and how I treated girls based on that. And then what I learned when I started doing this work, how women live in a totally different world than we do. And then it's just like, guys, do we care about women's lives? 1 in 2 are raped, sexually assaulted. That's 1 in 2 women we know. 1 in 3 are beaten. That's our sisters, our mothers, our wives. And it's by other men. And men just stay silent. And our silence supports the violence. So we have to speak up in partnership with women. We have to work in partnership with women to end men's violence because it's got to stop. It's horrible.
You made a really powerful statement that was a big leap. And I want to go back and kind of dissect that leap. And that is, you said, I realized that these benefits were so compelling, so beneficial, that we have to manage it through the community. We have to manage it legally. Help me understand why you realized that enlightenment, increased awareness, even maybe regret or remorse wasn't enough of a consequence to mitigate or change behavior.
Well, it's very interesting because I worked in these groups, facilitating these groups for 10 years, over 1,000 men, and we had a 24-week group once a week. They're mandated by the courts, and they had 90 days hanging over their head. And if they had kicked out of the group, then they had to do some jail time because we had written agreements with probation and the courts. And the key point was signing these documents because that makes the criminal and civil justice system liable. They have to follow these contracts. The guy would be in week 16 or 18, and he's still denying his behavior, still blaming her. So I'd kick him out of group. And he'd go back to probation, and he'd do 10 days, and then he'd come back, and I'd make sure they sent him back to the same group so he couldn't manipulate a new facilitator. So he'd come back to our group, and at week 6 or 8, he'd taken full responsibility for his violence. And I'd ask him, this is really something. I mean, you were totally denying all your violence before, and now you're taking full responsibility for it. What happened? What changed? And man after man after man would say, because I know I can't get away with it anymore. I'd say, what changed? I'd say, I know I can't get away with it anymore because I had to do jail time. They were held accountable. And again, that just totally supported how critical that accountability is and that there are consequences for that violence. And you have that in combination with the group, that's fine. The groups can have potential, but the foundation is jail time. Foundation is that there will be consequences for this continued behavior because they haven't had any consequences for it. And in most places, they don't around the world. I remember when I went to Taiwan one time to train law enforcement in Taiwan, 3-day training. I thought, oh, this will really be interesting. This is the other side of the world. I wonder what it's like over there. And that's not what was interesting. What's interesting is that it was exactly, they were not arresting men who were beating their wives and girlfriends for the same reason they were not arresting them in St. Cloud, Minnesota, in the USA. Man's in charge. He's the head of the house. She has to obey him.
So ultimately, this is sexism at the root across the world.
Yeah, it is. One of the foundations of sexism is this male violence. And there's all kinds of male cultural norms that support this. The jokes, the comments about women's bodies, what we like to do to them, how we bond with each other around anti-woman and woman-hating sexist statements, around sexual exploitation and other things as well.
As a male facilitating these groups, tell me what it was like. How did they interact with you in these groups? Did they see you as one of them?
Well, I'm sure it was different than if it was a female, but we also had female facilitators, co-facilitators as well. But yes, men will listen to men way more likely than they'll listen to women because of sexism. And, we continue to have the conversation. And I knew male culture, raised in male culture, as you were, but as a man.
How did the men interact with you when they were in these sessions? Did they sort of see you as one of them? Did they see you as a person who wasn't going to hold them accountable just because you're a man, and particularly a white man?
Yeah, they know we're holding them accountable. They're into denial, minimize blame. So they'd push back all the time. We were clear, no, you can't get away with this. Yeah, this is a man working in a women's organization, feminist women's organization, saying, no, this has to stop, guys. This is not right. You have no excuse for this. It doesn't matter what she's doing. You don't have the right to hit her, slap her, punch her, And so, no, it wasn't like, oh, he's one of us, because they knew we were there for accountability and we were challenging them all the time, all the time, in different kinds of ways.
What kind of shocks me is that there's a theory of development, moral development by Kohlberg that was put out years ago, where it describes how we develop a sense of conscience. And it starts out by, we first discover that when you do something wrong, there's a punitive reaction. And so you don't want to get hurt, so you don't do bad things. And then we hopefully will grow eventually to a place where we do things for the integrity of it, for the principle of it. So help me understand, what do you think is happening in men's development that's causing them to stay basically at the lowest rung of moral development when it comes to their relationship with women?
Oh, I think it's all the social and cultural messages they get as boys and as men. But women are inferior. Women are sexual objects you can use or abuse as you wish, and there'll be no consequences for that. So it's selfishness. It's greed. It's, I can do this and get away with it. And it's interesting, too, that some people say hurt people. But the reality, my experience is that hurt people help people. Because I worked with many men, there are 4 brothers in a family, and their dad was abusing their mom. And they'd be in the closets hiding or under the bed. Big sister would have their arm around them and hear their mother screaming and then come out. She's got black eye and bruises all over. And 3 out of those 4 boys said, no, I will never do this, because they went through that sorrow. They saw the pain. And one boy said, oh, well, this kind of worked for dad. He got what he wanted all the time. So then one boy decided to. But 3 out of the 4 said no. And so hurt people help people. But there's so many cultural norms about manhood. I mean, when I was in first grade, I was in a little Catholic school. I was 6 years old, and I found out the worst thing I could be is a girl. Don't throw like a girl. Don't throw a ball like a girl. Don't run like a girl. Don't do anything like a girl. That's how I know I was the right kind of boy. So it didn't even take a 6-year-old rocket scientist to figure out that, oh, if the worst thing I can be is a girl, then, oh, boys are better than girls.
Yeah, it's really hard. I know that the messaging starts unbelievably young, and the benefits that you list in your article are really interesting. Are there maybe sort of like 10 that really stood out to you that shocked you the most when you were making that whiteboard of reasons?
They all did. But, I dictate reality. I get to control everything. I get to control all the money. Even if she's working, I control all the money. So he entraps her. He isolates her. She's just an object. He gets to decide how the money's spent. And he gets her to admit that it's her fault. She's to blame for the battering, and tell her cops, tell prosecutors, deny what she had said earlier. And this is all because of his threats of harm. And at the same time, there are men who grow up in the same culture who decide not to be violent towards women, who know that that is wrong. So just because we're born in this culture and raised in this culture is no excuse for the violence, because there are so many men that say, no, that's wrong. No, but we just have to speak up.
I can almost hear the naysayers, though, because we get this all the time, but women allow it. And so what is the woman's responsibility for being in a relationship where violence is happening? Shouldn't she just wake up, get a clue, and get out? So what do you say to that when you hear, because I'm sure you've heard that as well many times. She would get out if she could. He's controlling all the money. Even if she's working, she doesn't have any finances. He has told her, if you ever leave me, I will kill you. And this is not extreme. I'm not exaggerating. This is not extreme. This is common. I will kill you, or I will kill the children. And there are men who will kill her best cat or her dearest dog just to prove to her, no, if you ever leave me, I will kill you. I'll kill your parents. I'll kill your brother. I will beat you. I will stalk you.
Yeah, the threats are deep. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that she would leave if she could. I love the way that you said that. It's so simple and it's so accurate. I know for me, my abuser told me the only way out was in a body bag. But he said it as a joke, right? It was just a joke, and it's so funny. But yet that probably was the only way out if I, wasn't careful. And the way my situation played out, I was lucky to get out safely. but a lot of women can't leave. And it's not always finances, but I do see that very commonly. And even with emotional abuse, he has psychologically manipulated you into thinking that it's your fault, that you can't leave, that you're not going to do well if he leaves or he'll take the children. And I just think that's a big miss on people. I also think that societally, we're focusing on what she did to bring on the abuse or why she didn't leave, why she stayed, why she picked him, instead of what you're talking about, which is where does the abusiveness come from? When I try to talk about that online, there's a lot of pushback. I recently made a video highlighting your article and it did unbelievably well. And women around the world were like, oh my God, what an incredible article. This is so eye-opening. Thank you for sharing. And albeit the men were quite quiet, but the ones that did comment most often said, I'd love to see this list for women. What are the benefits of women's abuse? Let's talk about women. Why is this so focused on men? What would you say to that?
It's classic. Anytime you deal with an oppressor, what they want to do is shift the focus to the victim. And this men are doing this all the time. Shift the focus to her so you're not focusing on me. So I don't have to change my behavior. I keep getting all the benefits I want from sexism in general, from battery. So yeah. And these poor women, anytime they go out for help, one of the first things they hear, what were you doing? Right? Put the focus on her rather than him. Right? And so it's very convenient for men that happens, but it's very wrong.
It's such an insidious thing. So what I hear you say is that this is a pervasive mindset that doesn't change unless there is firm and rigid and enforced consequences. So when you think about our society as a whole, where do you think we're going wrong in enforcing consequences?
Well, one of the things that we did at St. Cloud Intervention Project in St. Cloud is that we worked with the criminal justice system, police chief, sheriff, prosecutors, probation, judges, and we made protocols and agreements with them about arrests. And we trained them too about what to look for the violence. What are the key clues that the violence is going on? And we created contracts and they signed those contracts. And again, that was critical that they signed it because now they're liable. And then we would track them. We would track and monitor because this is public information in the US. So we would track and monitor every call for a domestic and see how many were arrested, how many were not arrested. And then we would track how the prosecutors prosecuted this case. And then we track what kind of consequences the judges provided. And so we had this information. And a lot of these individuals in the U.S. are elected officials. Judges, sheriffs, police chiefs are signed by the city councils in the state, Minnesota. So anyway, we not only did we set up these protocols, but we also tracked and monitored. And so like the arrest rates in St. Cloud in 83 went from 25% to like 85% arrest rates per call. So in the past, before we started doing this work, they had maybe 1 in 4 arrests. And then when we started doing this work and tracking them, it was 85% were arrests. And prosecution went up to like 92% prosecution from, in cases that were arrested, 62% or something like that. So that made a big difference. And I think it's critical. And the domestic abuse intervention programs in Duluth, Minnesota has all the kinds of materials that's needed to develop this kind of intervention because it's a community intervention. And what will happen is the guys who don't want to change, they just start moving to a different community who's not making arrests and not holding them accountable. But we saw a massive change in St. Cloud and we saved many people's lives, women and children's lives because of the work, because the law enforcement, prosecutors, judges agreed to go forward and hold these men accountable, that it was wrong. But we had to track and monitor and create contracts with them to make that happen.
It's sad to me that I don't see that very often anywhere in these people who are, whether they're elected or not, the people who are there to make the decisions and hold them accountable, the police officers, the judges, the people who work in the prosecutor's office, all of it, they're not doing enough. I know I had an experience with partner assault response program, which, names aside, sounds very similar to what you were doing, what you were leading. And a prosecutor told me that it's really great. This program is so great. It's really effective. And I said, how do you measure its effectiveness? And she said, well, they don't go on to re-offend. And I said, but by your own definition to me, my abuser didn't offend because you take offend by being charged or convicted, and they're often not convicted. So are they just learning how to get away with it better? And she kind of shrugged at me. And the victim advocate that was on the call with me said she recognized how disappointing that call was and how much the prosecutor missed the whole point of my question and just saw it as effective when it is in fact not effective. It's provably not effective. So I love that you've changed the narrative and changed the focus to the accountability piece and the focus on the system. It's not just that we need education and awareness, though we do, but that's not the only piece. The biggest miss is the accountability. And I'm so happy that you're highlighting that. It's really great work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. In fact, I'd like to jump over to the podcast extra. And here's the question, and maybe we can't answer it, but I'd like to try. And that is, what could we do as a society to make it safer for both men and women? If you say that it's programming and it starts right from the moment you knew by the age of 6 that you had an advantage as a man, what could we be doing in families with our kids to make this a different place? So we're going to jump over to the podcast extra and talk about that. But Chuck, thank you so much for being on today. How can people find you if they'd like to learn more about the Gender Violence Institute or more about you? Can you tell us is there anything that you're doing currently that they could find out more information?
Well, there's our website, genderviolenceinstitute.org, but I'm semi-retired, but they can also email me at gvi@frontiernet.net. Gender V Violence Institute, gvi@frontiernet.net.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes so people can find it. Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you for being on with us. We've been super excited about this. Thank you for your fantastic work.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your amazing work.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Carrie McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club, at carriemcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.